A Markie Scenic Showman'S engine. This is part 5, completing the gas firing conversion. In the last episode, part 4, I made this, and here as a special treat is a shot of the paint drying. This original mounting idea was okay really. It held the burner as shown here. All I had to do was bolt this into the traction engine. To be honest, I wasn't happy with it, so I'm going to make another one using a different principle, very much like the methylated spirit burner. This uses a central bent steel tube. This I think is the best method because it allows access to the check valve, which can also be used for draining the water out of the boiler, just by undoing the union that holds the pipe onto the check valve and using a small Allen key to depress the ball inside and release the water. On with the job. To support the burner and the bracket that fixes to the engine, I'm not going to use a piece of tubing, I'm going to use a piece of brass bar, and this is 1/4 inch in diameter. I need to duplicate this mounting bracket using brass, drill it and use steel bolts to mount it to the engine. As usual, as all my tutorials are designed for beginners, I'm showing a quick and simple method of transferring the bolt positions onto a new piece of metal. I coated one side of both of the pieces of brass with marking out blue, and here I'm pressing the larger piece onto the bolts, which leave a mark in the marking out blue. Then all I had to do was drill 3 holes in the piece of brass. The outer 2 I'm tapping 4BA, and the large hole in the centre is a 1/4 inch diameter. I'm temporarily fitting some brass bolts just to check the alignment, but when this part is finished and silver soldered to the bar, I will be using steel screw bolts as shown here. Here's a piece of brass that's going to fit at the burner end. Once again I used marking out blue, held the part over the block and used my scriber to mark the bolt positions. After which I drilled the holes 9/64 of an inch in diameter, which is clearance size for 4BA bolts. The next part of this job is not quite so simple. I'm bending the brass using a pipe bender, but you cannot bend a piece of 1/4 inch diameter brass using a small pipe bender like this because you will break it. The secret is to heat the piece of brass where you're going to bend it to cherry red. Then let it cool slowly, and when it's fully cooled, you can bend it like this without it breaking or without it breaking your pipe bender. It doesn't bend as easily as copper tubing, but it bends. After making a reverse bend further down the piece of brass, here's what it's going to look like. By holding the now bent brass bar against the original steel pipe, I can mark the length required using a felt tip pen. Here I'm in the outer part of the workshop on my brazing hearth, applying some flux. I fitted the brass bar into the bracket, and now I'm just waiting until it gets to the right temperature to apply the silver solder. As soon as the flux takes on a watery appearance, that's the time to apply the solder. As usual in these tutorials, I'm applying the solder slightly early so you can see it flash around the joint. And also I'm applying too much silver solder. Normally I do this in the tutorials so you can see the silver solder responding to the capillary action. I let this part cool to black and quenched it in some water. Now I can turn my attention to the other end. My brazing hearth is a very simple affair. It's in the outer part of the workshop on a steel table, which has a wooden top, covered with 2 sheets of insulation material followed by 2 lots of vermiculite blocks. Just by moving 4 of the blocks and using some packing, I can make it so that the part is perfectly aligned with the bracket, which will form the burner support on the finished fitting. And here, once again, I'm applying the silver solder, plenty of it too. Once again, I left the part to cool to black and quenched it in some water. I didn't put this in my acid bath to save time, I just used a file to clean up the surface. But the finish wasn't good enough straight from the file, so in order to get a good finish, I wrapped a piece of emery cloth around the file. And now it looks like this. It doesn't need to be polished, it's a very rudimentary item out of sight underneath the engine. In this clip, using the original methylated spirit burner, you can see that the angle of my new fitting matches the angle of the old one. And when this completed assembly is bolted into the traction engine, the burner will be in the correct position under the firebox. Now it's time to permanently mount the bolts into the larger of the 2 brackets. I'm using a small amount of Loctite 603 for this to hold the bolts permanently in position on the bracket. Once these bolts are tightened in position as I'm doing here, they're never going to work loose. Refitting the completed assembly into the traction engine was not good fun. It took ages. I used some grease to hold the nut into the socket, and after a while both of the nuts were tightened onto the bolts. I didn't video this because you don't want to see a grown man cry, but I got there in the end. Now it's time to fit the gas tank, and unlike the methylated spirit tank with its copper pipe, the pipe from the gas tank has fittings on it so it will not go through the hole in the floor of the cab. And to make matters worse, the pipe isn't long enough to reach the valve on the gas tank. Also, when I mark the position using a scriber, you can see how close to the edge the mounting hole would be, so this is no good at all. And apart from that, the position of the gas tank looks so wrong. I sat back and looked at the job, and then suddenly an idea hit me. If I mount the tank on the towing bracket, it's in a better position, and in case this small steam engine ever needs to tow anything, this can be done using the tank's mounting bracket. And also the gas pipe is still a bit tight, but it more or less is the right length. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I present the Markie Scenic Showman'S traction engine, complete with gas firing. And as I've just mentioned, the bit sticking out of the tank at the back can be used for towing something. After carefully laying the engine on its side, here's the underside view. Note the easy access to the union nut on the check valve. And there you have it. This very small and pretty traction engine is now gas-fired, and there's far less chance of it emulating a Viking funeral. Mechanically it works, the generator works, and the gas firing is yet to be tested, and hopefully all of that should take place in the next episode. From me, I'd like to say stay safe, stay well, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back, making it unnecessary to comment that the videos are too short.